Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of System Shock Radio. I, as always, am your host, Nigel, and yes, we are finally doing episode 60. Now, I know I'm a few days late when it comes to putting up this episode. I originally was going to do the episode yesterday, but unfortunately, I wasn't feeling so well, so I got pushed to today. And then, because I kind of slept tried to sleep off my headache that I was having, and I woke up and read the news of what was going on in Texas, and it's absolutely insane. It's who would who does things like this? Like, how evil can you be to do things like this? Like, what the shooter did, killing the 14 people in the elementary school in Texas. It's 10-year-olds dying, teachers dying. It's crazy, and it's insane what between this and then what happened in Buffalo. Oh, and then even a couple days after, or not a couple days after, like I think day of my graduation. It's like what is going on? And I think yeah, the day after there was a shooting at a church in California. It's insane what is going on, honestly. But I said I would give you guys episode 60, talking about the video game crash of 1983, and that's exactly what I'm going to do for you guys. So, the video game crash of 1983. Now, during research for this topic for this video, I was surprised to learn that there was apparently a few video game crashes, but this one's one of the notable ones from 1983. This was one of the really, really big ones. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, we got to start off with, well, what was the video game crash of 1983? So, it was a large scale recession in the video game industry that took place from 1983 to 1985, mainly in the United States. So, but as we're gonna learn throughout this video, turns out signs were there and things were kind of on a downward spiral as far back as even like 1981 to 1982. But yeah, so 1983 was when it officially started, and it was a huge recession. Home video game revenues peaked at 3.2 billion at the time. This is when a lot of home video game consoles were really starting to spring up and everything. But they fell to only 100 million by 1985. That is a 97% drop. That is absolutely insane. The crash ended the second console generation with consoles known as such as the Atari VCS, aka the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, the Odyssey 2, the ColecoVision, etc. That was known as the second console generation at the time. And it impacted the video game arcade market, although to a lesser extent, and it signaled the end of the golden age of video games. So, I'm a man who absolutely loves video games. I talk about video games on here. I reviewed some video games. I just reviewed Spyro 1 Reignited over on my YouTube channel. If you haven't already, go check that out. But yeah, so I love video games, and a lot of people love video games. Video games are a big thing nowadays, and they even were back in the day. So the fact that they were almost wiped out, how pretty big, at least here in the United States, that is crazy to think about. There's almost a world without video games that I grew up in, and I can't imagine a world without video games, but it almost happened. So, what caused the crash of the video game market? So, there's four factors that mainly led to it, and we're going to talk about them here. The first is a flooded console market. So, the Atari 2600, it was the most popular second gen console at the time. This is back when Atari, it was its own video game console company and not just a subsidiary like it is now. And I think it is a subsidiary of Activision, if I'm not mistaken, which we'll get to. But but this is back when it was its own video game console company. So, while other consoles had many video games produced by the companies themselves, the Atari 2600 had mostly third-party video games produced by someone else. So, for example, with the Nintendo Switch, we get third-party games like Mortal Kombat and like I think it was another Fortnite, is another third party, but then we also get some console exclusive games made by the developers themselves, like the Mario games, Legend of Zelda games, stuff like that. So the Atari, he relied mostly on the third party games. So analysts noted a trend of saturation, and noting that the amount of new software coming in would produce a few big hits. It's, and that retailers devoted too much floor space to systems, and that price drops from home computers would result in an industry-wide shakeup. So this was a bit obviously before the video game crash, and already what we're seeing is the writing on the wall. So additionally, the growth of the video game industry led to a high demand, which manufacturers overprojected. In 1983, an analyst for Goldman Sachs stated that the demand for video games was up by 100%. However, manufacturing output was up by 175%, leading to a significant surplus. So, this may not seem like a big deal at first, but if you think about it, the surplus is greater than demand, and here's how supply and demand works. If demand is low but supply is high, you get an overabundance of things. And think about it, these cartridges, which the Atari 2600 was a cartridge-based game, these cartridges are essentially being overproduced, and there's an abundance of them. There's a bunch that aren't being sold. There's way too many that are being made. So the demand for these is low, although it's 100%, which may not seem like a whole lot. But when supply is at 175%, and that's a 75% difference. That means there's a lot of these cartridges being produced, and not as many people buying them. So while Atari CEO Raymond Kassar recognized the saturation problem was imminent in 1982, and again, if I mispronounce any of these names, I apologize. While he recognized that the saturation problem was imminent in 1982, again, there that is again, the writing being on the wall as far back as 82, he expected it to occur when half of American households had a video game console. However, by the time of saturation, only 15 million units were sold, which greatly undershot Kassar's estimate. So, basically what we have here is a situation where the CEO, Raymond Kassar, was pretty much saying that he essentially wanted the problem to fix itself, but that ended up not happening, which means that there weren't a lot of consoles out there, and thus not a lot of cartridges being sold for these consoles. So that's a pretty bad thing. So there's the flooded console market, and a lot of consoles were being dropped in the market at the time as well. So the market was being over flooded. It was being flooded in really, really bad. So next we got loss of publishing control. So before 1979, there were no third-party video game developers, with video game console manufacturers developing the video games for their own consoles. This changed when Activision was founded in 1979. And Activision was founded by 4 former Atari programmers who felt that Atari's developers should be getting the same amount of recognition as the actors, directors, and musicians working for other subsidiaries of Warner Brothers, who was Atari's parent company. So, now when I researched this and I read this, actors, sure, musicians, sure, or directors, mainly because directors are supposed to be like a main person in charge. So the developers would be, I'd say, sure, same level as like actors and stuff like that. But directors, but that's just me. But the developers who are already familiar with how the Atari 2600 worked, these are the Activision developers, those who founded Activision and everything. The 4 developers developed both their own games and their own cartridge manufacturing process. And Atari, when they learned about this, were not happy. They attempted to sue in order to block sales and everything, but the case failed before being settled in 1982. And at first, Activision was only one of a handful of third-party video game developers developing games for the Atari 2600. However, more companies joined in on the trend by 1982, attempting to emulate the success of Activision, creating lackluster games, also known as shovelware. So basically, what shovelware is, and shovelware is nothing new, and honestly, it's still a problem even to this day. It's pretty much very low budget, very quickly made, very easy to make games. Just boom, 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 push onto the console. These are games that are low in quality, that look like they took maybe hours to make, and that no time, no effort or gone into them, but they're on the console, and like I said, this is a problem that's going on even to this day, and the Wii especially was guilty of having a lot of shovelware titles on its console. But we have a quote here from Byte magazine, and it says, "In 1982, few games broke new ground in either design or format. If the public really likes an idea, it is milked for all it's worth, and numerous clones of a different color soon crowded the shelves. That is, until the public stops buying or something better comes along. Companies who believe that microcomputer games are the hula hoop of the 1980s only want to play quick profit." So, and we have another quote. This is from Bill Kunkel, who's a graphic novelist and pro wrestling / video game journalist. And we're kind of paraphrasing here part of it, only so that it makes sense and that it's cohesive. It says, "These companies had licensed everything that moves, walks, crawls, or tunnels beneath the earth. You have to wonder how tenuous the connection will be between the game and the movie Marathon Man. What are you going to do? Present a video game root canal?" And then this quote is from The Phoenix, which is a magazine, in 1983. "Atari 2600 cartridges are no longer a growth industry." And what we see here with the E's is them pointing to this overabundance of licensed video games, of this shovelware type stuff, where just bad games being thrust onto the console, and it really hurt the market at the time. So not only was the video game market flooded with ideas, but there was limited competitive space. There was a lot going around and not a whole lot of space to operate with these games. Nowadays, you still have console wars, but it seems like there's a lot more space. So, but yeah, back then it was a problem, especially when a lot of these were like the same type of games, where it really felt like the same games being produced, and they all sucked. So Activision projected that the total cartridge market in 1982 would be 60 million, which would theoretically allow Activision to secure between 12 and 15% of the market for their production numbers. However, there turned out to be over 200% production for cartridges over the demand, which led to stockpiling of old unsold inventory. See, there's that saturation problem again. There's all those cartridges being produced again, that supply and demand and coming up again. So that seemed to be a pretty big problem, and one of the main factors of what had caused the video game crash, at least to me. The next is lack of consumer confidence. So while Atari was at the top of the video game market, new companies arising caused Atari to fall from that position, such as like Activision, as we mentioned. Atari's attempts to get back into that position led to a lack of consumer interest, both in Atari and in the video game industry as a whole. So this is back when the video game industry was a bit smaller than it is now. And people are saying, well, if Atari's failing and they're at the top of the video games, that probably means the rest of them suck too. So that led to a downturn in interest for video games. And to rub more salt in the wounds, there were also two ports of different games to the Atari 2600 that were critically panned and weakened consumer confidence in Atari. They're ports of Pac-Man, the Atari 2600 port of Pac-Man, and E.T., based off the E.T. extraterrestrial movie, a movie which I admit I have never seen. But what we see here is two games. What we have here are two games that are notorious for being terrible on the Atari 2600. You may be thinking, Nigel, Pac-Man is all kinds of fun. What do you mean terrible? Pac-Man is like fun. It's a legendary game. Yeah, I know. I love Pac-Man, but not on the Atari 2600. The Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 is terrible. It looks terrible. It plays terribly. It moves terribly. It's just a terrible game all around. And ET is notorious. It's probably one of like the textbook bad video games. When you tell someone about bad video games, ET always is always one that comes up. To the point where there's a landfill in New Mexico of unsold ET cartridges. Well, there was a landfill. I think it's been dug out by this point, if I'm not mistaken. But big landfill of unsold ET cartridges, which a lot of people saw as symbolic of not just Atari, but this whole crash and everything. It was very symbolic how nobody wants these games because they suck. But another factor, and the fourth factor that we're going to look at, was competition from home computers. So, new home computers being unveiled had better color graphics and better processors as opposed to home consoles. Computers had also had other uses as well, such as word processing. And we have a quote here from Dan Gutman, who's the founder of Video Games Player magazine in 1982, and we actually have a couple quotes from him. This first one says, "Video games were officially dead and computers were hot." And then this next one says, "Who was going to pay 200 plus for a machine that could only play video games?" And this last one says, "People ask themselves, why should I buy a video game system when I can buy a computer that will play games and do so much more?" Or, computers competing with home consoles. I wonder where I've heard that one before. And yes, even to this day, PC gaming is still a huge market. The PC master race memes, of course, this PC being able to run video games at high frame rates as opposed to consoles, and do a whole lot of other stuff as well for your everyday needs. Surf the web, use Microsoft Office, things like that. So that was prevalent even back during this time, and it was one of the things that were a big factor in the crash. So some results of the crash. As there was many results from the crash, some good, some bad. So the release of so many new games in 1982 flooded the market, with most stores having insufficient space to carry new games and new consoles. Excuse me. There was a lot of space at first devoted to housing these new games and selling these new games and new consoles and everything, and they were running out of room because they had to sell other stuff. But companies such as Magnavox left the gaming industry, while companies such as iMagic eventually folded. And Atari was hit extremely hard by the events, with their share of cartridge-based games falling from 75% in 1981 to less than 40% in 1982. So we see a big blow to Atari, which a lot of people have blamed for the video game crash. Now, the blame doesn't fall entirely on them, but they definitely didn't help matters with a lot of their decisions and everything. And it was said that Atari made a lot of rash and some would call boneheaded decisions during this whole ordeal, which led to their stock falling and the video game crash and everything. So retailers either reduced their stock of video game consoles significantly or stopped selling them altogether, allowing space for more products. Thankfully, they sell video game consoles today and everything, but it's always sectioned off in the electronics section in how they have bigger store space to sell other things. Arcades were affected by the crash as well, with over 1,500 of them closing. So, we see arcades being hit as well. It's not just home consoles, but arcades as well. Video games were turned on. That's essentially what we're seeing in the crash and everything. And the effects of the video game crash rippled through the industry as a whole, although video game sales still remain strong in Europe, Canada, and Japan from American video game companies. But there is a bright side to this, besides the one I just had, how the video game market was still high in those other places. There were two major events that helped the video game industry recover: the increased sales of personal home computers and the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. Yes, that's right, the NES helped save the video game market. So, the video game industry began recovering by 1985, and Nintendo dominated 70% of the video game market by 1988. Yep, Nintendo became a big force in video games, and up till this very day, they still are. And we have a quote here from Hiroshi Yamauchi. Again, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Who was the president of Nintendo in 1986. Atari collapsed because they gave too much freedom to third-party developers, and the market was swamped with rubbish games. And so, pretty much reiterating everything we've been talking about here in this video and everything. So, as the crash happened, Japanese video game studios tried to shift the focus from arcade games to home consoles. And another effect of the crash was the attempt to control third-party development of software. So I was trying to get things back on track. The NES was created mainly to not make the same mistakes as like the Atari 2600, the major contributors of the crash and everything. So the NES tried to right the wrongs of its predecessors in the video game industry, and Japanese video game companies started coming up and helping save the video game industry, such as, of course, Nintendo and Konami, things like that. So, of course, computer gaming also grew as a result of the crash, as we talked about. So, like I said, computer gaming is still a big thing to this day. But, yeah, so that about covers it, I think. This video game crash, pretty big deal, caused by a lot of mistakes, some of which it looks like they're still making to this day. There's still shovelware that exists on video game consoles, and there's still there's not as many yeah, there is still third-party games, but there's not as many licensed games from what I'm noticing. But yeah, hopefully these mistakes don't lead to another big crash, although hopefully that shouldn't be the case, especially with the video game industry being as big as it is. But then again, maybe that means that the crash could be even more significant, and with the video game industry being as big as it is today, because it was big at the time and this crash happened and a lot of stuff changed. But yeah, so that's gonna just about do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course thank you all so much for your patience and everything getting this video out. If you did enjoy, please like, comment, share, all that good stuff. If this is your first time watching System Shock Radio, thank you for tuning in with me. Hope you enjoyed, and if you're returning, thank you again for joining me once again, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys later. Peace.